Welcome to another More Than Walking video podcast discussion, where we seek to encourage dialogue on a variety of topics with the unique perspectives of people with spinal cord injuries and other disabilities. It is our goal for these conversations to make us think critically and for us to all lead with a newfound sense of belonging in a world where we have more things in common than we do different. Tonight's topic is, are you renewing or unsubscribing in this cancel culture climate? And what I mean by that question is, are you standing firm on your beliefs and what you think is right, or what you think is the best direction for maybe your family, yourself personally, for others in general as a country? Or are you unsubscribing? Are you finding yourself joining some of the cancel culture tirades? Are you losing patience a lot quicker with people and some of the events and things that are said? Are you easily more offended because of somebody saying something that maybe 10 years ago you wouldn't be so sensitive to now? So, really, where are you personally in this culture that we are existing and living and thriving in? I'm your host, Corey Feasley, an aspiring artist here in the state of Connecticut. And I just want to thank everybody again for taking time out of your night to just join this discussion. We really want to respect and honor people's opinions and thoughts on whatever topic that we cover. And we just hope to just gain a little bit more of an understanding as we discuss. So, before we begin, I just want everybody just to kind of quickly introduce yourself and where you're calling in from, and then I'll make another statement.
Hello, I'm Tahira Johnson. I am, my level of injury is C4, C5. I was injured 15 years ago playing roller derby, and I'm calling in from Oklahoma City.
Wow. I'm Fred Sigworth, and my claim to fame is I'm Jonathan's dad. And my day job, I run a research lab at Yale University, and my part-time job is taking care of my wife, who's an activist, who's really a real activist about disability and also mental illness, mental health.
Awesome, thank you.
My name's Jason Thurston. I'm a C6 quadriplegic due to a diving accident 18 years ago. I'm calling in from the Adirondack Mountains of New York State, way up north in the middle of a 6 million acre forest reserve.
Oh, I love the seltzer water. Love that stuff. I'm a big fan.
What a living situation. That sounds totally awesome.
Cool. All right. So, mass media is constantly pumping through the conduits of almost every electronic device that we operate on a daily basis, such that it can be hard to unplug ourselves and just digitally detox. Such an influx of information can be overwhelming and divisive as we try to make sense of the world around us. One troubling aspect of the media frenzy has been the trend of cancel culture, a form of ostracizing someone because of an offensive or insensitive statement or action they made. While there is nothing wrong with holding one accountable for what they say or do, in some cases, we rush to judgment quickly before the facts are laid bare, which can cause irreversible damage to the targeted person's career and life. How should we engage with and encounter the adverse effects of this cultural phenomenon? So one thing, while I was preparing for this discussion, I looked at a Pew Research poll on this very topic, cancel culture. And there are a number of statistics that I'm not going to say that they're alarming, but it almost seems like, because they vary so much, this leads to a lot of misinformation and miseducation on the subject. And Fred, I heard you say earlier, you said that as a professor on campus, you hear students talk about it, but you kind of are like a little bit out of the loop when it comes down to like trying to understand it. And I talked to my parents about it too, and they told me the same thing. They really didn't understand it, which makes the research more compelling, because usually adults 50 and older are kind of like, what is this thing called cancel culture? And those who are 30 to 39 have heard it before. And those who are 30 and below are really kind of like in the mix and really understand what's going on, especially because of the advent of social media. So when I looked at the statistics, what I'm having trouble with is the fact that we know in essence what the term cancel means, and we know what culture means. And then when you gel those two things together, it becomes an environment. Just like we all have grown up in a different culture. Your mom and dad may have raised you differently from someone else. And when we think about this culture, it has effects on not only the people that become ostracized or held accountable, but also on our rights. So it leads us to question one. In America, we sometimes scream at one another when exercising our First Amendment. It protects our voice and other liberties, but we must be responsible for how we choose to use our words. What we say can have devastating effects, and in some countries, people have been put to death for publicly demonstrating just exactly how they feel. How can the doorway to freedom of speech remain open in an environment that hinges on closing it quickly over disagreeable subjects? And Jason, I would love for you to answer that first.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think that part of what's going on in society today is that everything's under a magnifying glass. Everybody has a camera in their pocket. So everything that's said, every idea that's thought is out there. And in combination with that, you have a lot of confirmation bias. So people are clinging to, more polarized ideals, and they're just looking for something to argue about almost. So under that, guys, I think that it's important that we're able to speak our minds, but it's also important to respect each other too. And I think that might be one of the keys to working through this, is to respect each other. And I mean, language is constantly changing. Whatever the political correctness of today is not what it was 10 years ago, and certainly not what it was 50 years ago. So I think, so respect is important, and understanding just those political correctness edges, and recognizing that some words that were used 50 years ago aren't so friendly now.
So you say respect. Doesn't respect kind of teeter on another person's standard?
Okay. Yes, it does. Now, how about understanding? How about that word? How about understanding each other better from where we're coming from before we react?
I like that. Fred, how about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I have friends. I kind of live in a liberal bubble, and kind of lean liberal with my politics and so on. And I've got friends and relatives who are on the other side, and I'm trying to learn how to respect and listen to them. And it's hard, So, for example, I have quite a few friends and colleagues who worked hard on the vaccine for COVID, and then I come across someone who does not thinks they are dangerous, or Bill Gates is behind it, or something like that, and I have a hard time starting with that. What I've read is to say, well, when you encounter someone you disagree with, the first thing to do is to listen and to respect them as a person. And so that's what I'm trying to do. But it's hard, and it makes it, more and more painful if I contact this person more and more.
You know what? I think you're definitely hitting it on the money, and just like Jason said about understanding and giving people the floor and the opportunity to say what it is, even if you disagree with it, off the bat. Not that, you know, not that everybody follows the Bible or anything like that, but one of the verses that come to mind is it says, "Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to wrath,"
Yeah.
because there's a net. You don't win people over by attacking, and that's kind of what we do in cancel culture. Is we are ready to attack as opposed to listen. So being able to have some sympathy and try to empathize with people through understanding helps to change. How about yourself, to hear, like, what do you think about freedom of speech in a world where we are so quickly want to cap somebody's ability to express themselves?
Right, right. There's always freedom of speech, but then, you get recorded and doxxed and lose your job. That's kind of probably almost have to watch what you say in public if you kind of lose your temper and say something you wouldn't normally say. And
Mm,
I mean, sometimes I do feel bad for people, even when they, make fun of someone in a group I'm in, like people of color or something. I think if we were all judged by the worst thing we've ever said, we'd all have to move and, change our last name. And I mean, I don't think people should be sort of driven underground for life because of some, especially when it's something strictly that they've said and not
yeah.
done to someone. But yeah, right. And then there's the you have the freedom of speech, and then you also have sort of the rising, I don't know if it's rising racism or it's just people feeling more like they can say what they want now and they don't
Mm,
really have to respect people. And I suppose that's part of the polarization that's gotten worse over the past several years. Um, so that makes it difficult. But yeah, I think the more we clamp down on people, though, kind of the angrier people get, right? So if they already feel a certain way about certain races or immigrants or whatever the deal is, and then we try and humiliate them for it, I don't think it's very helpful.
yeah, no, you're right. I mean, and I think that's where the ostracizing aspect comes into it, because this is really bore out of pain. And just to give a little context in history, it was like in the 80s where I think it was like in a movie or a song, and the term canceled was being used, and it was in reference to like a breakup, right? And then, once the Me Too movement began, this is where cancel culture started to kind of like accelerate, because now we're taking celebrities and high profile individuals and we're saying, enough is enough. You're not going to be protected by your money, your wealth, your notoriety, if you're doing things that you ought not to be doing, like the Harvey Weinsteins and others who have been convicted of, sexual assault, and those who have used profane language as it comes down to race, and just a slew of other charges and allegations that folks have been indicted over. And so now we're at a place where its intentionality, I think, was bore out of pain, right? So women are suffering in silence, and now, they're coming to the light and saying, "Hey, listen, no, I was touched inappropriately at this point in time by this, wealthy individual," and now we put those individuals out there in the court of public opinion, and now they're losing endorsements. Now they're no longer in commercials, etc. But one of you guys said something, and it's going to end up leading to question two, about the length of time that one should have to kind of be held accountable for. Do you guys think there's some level of, all right, slap on the wrist, don't do it again, or should kind of everybody just be fired immediately? Fred, I'll let you take that.
Yeah, that's really scary. I think of the woman in Central Park who encountered the African American bird watcher and somehow sort of thought, "Oh, you don't belong here." And the final result, of course, this was plastered across the New York Times. final result was that she was fired. You know, she was in some pretty high profile job, and this is a tragedy because our goal is education and understanding. It's not, you know, getting back at the person and punishing them. Yeah, it doesn't help. Like Tahira said, you know, there's been this sort of increasing level of combativeness and, you know, looking for a villain. And, you know, my own email feed, I get, you know, these emails from liberal causes that are designed to make me get angry and upset about something. And you know, television channels have figured out that they can monetize this thing, make lots of money by getting people upset.
Yeah, and that's very true. There seems to be like corporate interest sometimes in some of the combativeness. But Jason, how about you? Like, is there like a length of time that we have to feel like we make people accountable for, you know, they get exposed, they do whatever, community service, etc. Do you think there ought to be like some type of where they've compensated for what they've done or for that hurt or pain, and then people like have to kind of essentially move on?
Well, I think that really depends on what is done or said. But you know, there's words and then there's actions.
Right.
So when you were talking about like the Me Too movement and, you know, sexual predators that have gotten away with things for a long time, and then that's a whole different crime than like Fred said about the woman who wondered what the black man was doing in the park looking at birds. Like,
right.
That might have come from an innocent place. Like she, you know, not that it's okay, but she might just have been ignorant or out of the loop or in her own little bubble, like Fred said. I like that term because, you know, social media especially, and especially after the pandemic, everybody being locked inside, you know, you have that confirmation bias where you only look at the things that you agree with, and you only talk to the people that agree with what you have to say.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about the corporations knowing that when they get people upset, it makes them money. Well, that's the whole thing about social media. They find people stay on, you know, like 5 times longer if they're angry. And so they want people to argue. They want them to fight because they stay on longer and they get more money for the ads. It's really sad. But, you know, people develop these opinions that get stronger and stronger on either side. And then they have no tolerance for a slight thing, you know? So, yeah, it really depends on what's done or said. I think intent is a big part of it, in my opinion. You know, I mean, did someone say that to be hurtful, or did they say that just because they aren't educated or don't understand the other person?
That's one of the chief, the like in that Pew Research that I looked into. That's one of the chief things that helps to quell everything is trying to figure out intentionality behind it. You gotta allow for the facts to be placed in some really deep evaluation so that it's vetted, and then you can present a report to people and then let people decide, you know, where it goes, left or right. But I find that so many people are quick to take whatever it's almost like, and to hear it, like, you know, please follow up with this, but it almost sometimes seems like if it's popular and you go against it, let's say, you know, those who didn't believe that we should have invaded Iraq, right? Those people are looked at like, wait a minute, don't you just see what happened during 9/11? But then you fast forward 10 years later, and then it's like, hey, we shouldn't have done that. Now that person got chastised 10 years earlier. You know what I mean? So Tahira, what do you think?
Well, as far as whether or not we sort of get involved in wars, I'm not going to pretend I know nearly enough to say whether or not.
Well,
I
not
think
so
those
much getting
issues
involved, not so much getting involved in wars, but kind of like, you know, do you think that when there's like a popular subject and somebody goes against that popular subject, that people tend to want to cancel that person out. But that person may actually be on to something and see something that others did not see ahead of time. It was ostracized essentially for no reason because he went against the grain.
Right. I think having an unpopular view can be risky, I suppose, to admit that. And as far as yeah, and especially since people are sort of arguing these opposing sides, and a lot of us don't really know what we're talking about anyway. And then it becomes maybe, I don't know, the principle of the matter, or if you're with a certain political group, you're supposed to be on that side, and
Yeah.
you shouldn't really argue against. I was really kind of I didn't do a lot of complaining during our prior administration, not to make it too political here, but
Sure.
I don't know if anyone listens to Eckhart Tolle, and he quoted the French thinker who said that every nation gets the government it deserves, and that it's kind of this an expression of the underlying collective consciousness or unconsciousness that brings that into existence. And I always think we have to kind of accept the reality of where our society is, and not just kind of blame the other half for ruining things or something like that. I think people don't always look beyond the surface of what's really happening. So yeah, I tried not to get caught up in that polarization and kind of try and look at what's going on.
So, and I agree with that. It's easy to blame another person or another group of individuals for the problems that maybe society faces as a whole, because I think naturally we are eager to kind of cast stones. Again, not to make it religious or anything of that matter, but when I was talking to my wife yesterday, and we were talking about cancel culture and just talking about it from just like a biblical standpoint, and how this group of people brings this woman out who is committing adultery, and everyone's ready to stone her. And Jesus says very quietly, as he is, waving his stick in the sand and whatnot, he said, "He was without sin cast the first stone." And then as he looked up, everybody was gone. And it's kind of like, where are your accusers at? Because we have this inherent idea that somehow our standards are high enough that we can draft an opinion on another person's life sometimes and kind of throw them underneath the bus, when we need to be looking kind of at ourselves first before we can always evaluate. Now, some things are just blatantly obvious that need to be called out. What is wrong, and what is right, and we should hold people accountable. But going to something Fred talked about earlier about and you kind of like touched on it about, different sides to hear. Fred, you talked about like getting emails that kind of point you into the direction to be upset, like from maybe a particular group. Do you believe that there's something more nefarious at work when these things happen?
Is that for me or?
That's for Fred.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's my wife, Vicki. That had a question for me. You're gonna have to remind me, Corey, what the topic was.
No, I was saying that, Jahiri was saying about, different sides, they kind of like play the blame game. And then you talked about receiving like emails that kind of intentionally, get you upset. And Jason had talked about earlier about social media, kind of like it's like an engine that, more people were looking at it during COVID because they were inside, and thus, creating opinions and thoughts that may not agree with one side or the other. And I'm asking, because, in our world, we're kind of steeped in conspiracy theories. I was talking to John about this. Some people have heard this before, some people haven't. People think, like the Mona Lisa is Da Vinci depicting himself as a woman, the Kennedy assassination. There's so many stories and theories behind it. My question to you is, do you think there's something truly more nefarious at work when these advertisements are kind of coming at you and blitzing you to kind of draw you and pull you closer to formulating an opinion that maybe agrees with the masses?
Well, you can see where I'm coming from. I read this long article about Tucker Carlson and how he does things in Fox News, and it sounds like they've made a science out of getting people upset. They were tracking. They somehow did surveys, from minute to minute during the program, and during which part of the program were the most people paying attention. And of course, it's those emotion-filled moments. And so Tucker Carlson and I mean, it's probably not just him, but the team of people around him have sort of made it scientifically optimized how to get people upset, and so get the maximum number of viewers. It's really scary.
Jason, what's your take?
Well, that goes back to what I was saying about how people stay on longer if they're upset, and there are definitely certain people in the media that aim just to do that. The more they get somebody fired up about something, the more passionate they become about the issue that they want them to be about. I describe the circle of friends. Okay, you're on Facebook, right? And you have your circle of friends. All right. And one of your friends says something you don't like, right? So you unfriend them. But if you take the other side and it's somebody radical and you unfriend them, they just keep going around to their friends repeating the same more radical stuff. And as the people that don't agree with you spin out, it gets more and more and more radical. And you get, so no matter which side you're talking about or who you're backing or whatever, it creates these hotbeds to get people all fired up. And then also, like you said, conspiracy theories, it spins into that, different things that make the other side seem even more evil, like keeping children in cages and harvesting their blood for adrenaline or whatever. Whatever they say.
Adrenochrome.
That kind of radical idea has to stay within a pretty tight circle. Not everybody's going to fall for that, but the ones that do fall for it really fall hard.
Wow. Yeah, no, you're definitely onto something. And it reminds me of something I was thinking about, like the fact that how we confront these issues, right? Like if you don't agree with me, I just block you. Or like I unfriend you, I unfollow you. You know what I mean? Like we're no longer at a place where we can even discuss, like how we're just having a nice conversation, we're respecting each other's opinions and thoughts. Nowadays it's not that way. And there'll be like a slew of comments, of hatred and vitriol. You see it, and it's like even to the point, YouTube has to put a disclaimer, essentially keep the comments, respectful, this and that and the third, because people are actually, folks are taking their lives. It's cyberbullying, really. What cancel culture is invoking. We're quick to tell our children and students and young people, how to handle a problem. If you got an issue, in a disagreement, maybe go to that person, talk to them privately about it, reproach them kind of in love. You don't want to sit there and escalate the situation that doesn't have to turn out that way. But like you said, you become more radicalized. It leads to, things like, well, I don't want to point it out as like anti-Trump or anything like that, but just some of the things that people said, why they were there for January 6th, right? Or like why somebody shows up at a pizza shop, or why somebody shoots up a Republican baseball game. You know what I mean? That this radicalization that happens, lone wolf attacks, people who become extremists in any religion. That's not to point out any one particular faith, because people have been radicalized all throughout that. But what about you, Tahiri? Like, do you think there are like underlying things that people are trying to push onto others through social media?
Yeah, I don't spend too much time on social media myself, although I'm happy that Fred mentioned those emails you get that just try to sort of yank your chain and get you all riled up, and I'm trying to unsubscribe from a lot of that. And I think during the last election, I joined a bunch of things that looked at, and now I just regret it. You know, I go to my Hotmail, which is bad enough, and then there's like 200 messages, and oh my God. But also I was thinking about the woman with the dog complaining about the bird watcher, and I was thinking really what she did, I think, is more an expression of some kind of mental instability on her part. So to be further ostracized for that. And I also think with the new term of Karen, that people are becoming really, I guess, intolerant of like a woman who might express some kind of instability like that or something. We're going to just kind of annihilate them is kind of the temptation right now. So, what was your question?
No, essentially, that's what it. Well, just like it's more about like, do you think there's just something more underlying in society when it comes down to when we talk about like cancel culture and people who are speaking out the truth and do you find, like you said, you for a time period you had subscribed to a number of different maybe advertisers and stuff, but I was speaking more about like hidden agendas from whether it's governmental, societal agendas that you feel maybe are being pushed onto people in general.
Yeah, I think in general we're sort of in the people have become less tolerant. I think that's kind of the general idea, is to really not be tolerant of people who have different ideas or maybe go against a certain popular idea. It's sort of risky to kind of voice anything like that, especially on social media.
It's true. So then how do we differentiate between I can have an opinion on this and where do we develop this idea of standard and decorum at?
I feel like that when we're in a conversation with somebody, we have to do it right. We have to sort of bias our opinions. If somebody says something that I think, that's just wrong, that person in 10 years, I think Corey or Tahira, one of you said, they might turn out to be right and I might turn out to be wrong. So that means that this is something that a scientist has to do all the time. Scientist has to not allow himself to get too convinced by his own ideas because they're probably wrong, and in the same way, holding our opinions lightly seems to be the antidote.
It's difficult. It's difficult, to mind your tongue. I mean, I'm the father of a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old, and my 7-year-old is very, very opinionated and outspoken to the point where it's just like I have to tell him, like, this is why you get yelled at often. I hear the tenacity, and I love all that, but not to demean your age, but you don't know as much as you may think you do, right? And I think in a public space, as we talk about constantly throughout this conversation, it's about a level of education that people have to have. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to be a professor who understands this particular one concentrated subject, but if you're going to make an oral argument about why this person should no longer be allowed to come into this space because of something they did 15 years ago, articulate it in a way where, it's compelling, but not demeaning, right? We it's just one of those things where like people learn eventually. Sometimes people just learn over time. Sometimes they, it's a little bit harder. It's kind of like, okay, like I think about parole boards, right? A person who murdered someone in 1968 and is up for parole in 2008, and the family is kind of like, no, you don't know the hurt this person caused, you know, and no, I may not know that hurt, but that person was 19 then. They're, you know, triple the age. Now they're no longer that person. Do you continue to cancel and say, hey, no,
Yeah.
I think you need to stay in? You know what I mean? Because you're a violent person. And it's like the record, this person spent more time in jail than they did being free. And there's not a blemish on their record past the point of which the crime they've been committed for and indicted for and have been sentenced about. At some point, we have to kind of, I think, relinquish our feelings on the matter and just say, respectfully, I just disagree. But I'm not going to keep holding it over your head. Some things have to be, but others we have to find some sort of, ability to just say, okay, enough is enough. So, just going into our last question, we kind of like answered it a little bit earlier. But I just want to get everyone's feedback again. People can be very mean-spirited when expressing their viewpoints towards others. Nothing is said to hold that person accountable for their words, and it's often swept under the rug. When someone does come under fire, it's often refuted with statements like, I misspoke, or I was not aware, that was offensive. And when situations like these occur, should there be an immediate removal of that person if they had a public office, or should they have the opportunity to be educated about their offense? Like I said, we talked about that earlier. Now, I want to hear this, not to be biased or anything, but have you guys ever felt canceled because of your disability? And Fred, maybe have you ever felt canceled because of your age? And Tahira, I would like for you to answer that first. Have you ever felt canceled because of your disability? And if so, how did you handle that situation?
I think little things happen with disability that's not always, I guess, maybe to some extent. I had an assistant who was really good, but I had someone, a nurse came over, and the assistant kept answering the questions. Like the nurse would ask me something, and my assistant would kind of act like I wasn't here. So I just said, "Oh, I'm right here," and she was kind of, "Oh," and she didn't do it again. But just sometimes I think even when you're just always in a chair, and people are literally talking over you.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that and I don't know, before I was injured, maybe I did that to someone else, when I was still mobile. I'm not sure. It might just be, and I think this is also something that's come up before that we talked about, where I went to Chicago public schools and I never saw anybody in a wheelchair, not a single time. I never saw anyone disabled. And so they were all in separate schools and things are, at least in some areas, people in wheelchairs are in regular classes. So I think that'll make a difference. But I think a lot of people like my age and older don't know how to act. If you never knew anybody in a wheelchair and then you only see them when you're older, it's easy to, act like they're children and they're just sort of they're not part of the conversation or something. So I try not to take that real personally, but I do tend to pipe up when I feel like people aren't paying attention or kind of treating me differently than they would someone else. I mean, I can't think of anything specific, but.
What I was thinking about, because I watched your interview probably yesterday or so that you did with Jonathan, and you talked about like in the transportation sector and being able to have kind of like that accessibility. And you mentioned something about, going on the bus and them saying, oh, we made these changes or something to that effect. And those changes weren't either like adequate or they just didn't do them at all. And they kind of just overlooked it. And you brought it to, the transportation, like safety board or something like that. You brought it to their attention. So it made me kind of think about like, if you ever like noticed it with that, it's kind of like you're being told by the government or whatever institution that, hey, yeah, we're going to make these changes, but yet it's either done to the minimum extent or it's not being done at all.
Yeah, well, I think also when it comes to maybe things that need to be done as far as accessibility, or you really have to be persistent. I
Yeah.
mean, some people are not really, and sometimes it's just a matter of people not wanting to spend the money, or depending on what it is, there may be
Right.
other things that people don't want to have to deal with. But yeah, you definitely have to be persistent to sometimes get, really make changes.
Jason, how about yourself? You ever felt canceled because of your disability?
Misunderstood maybe. Uh, like you were saying, the people just don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And I always think back to before my injury, what I didn't see and what I didn't know about people in wheelchairs or any disability. I mean, I worked at the Independent Living Center and learned, a lot about all kinds of disabilities that I didn't understand before. So whenever there's it's a matter of words or a matter of mannerisms, I always find that to be a good teaching moment, and try to remain calm and just explain to people, why what they said could be worded a different way or something like that. But policy wise, you're absolutely right. You have to be persistent. People don't understand how important it is until you're there and you show them why you need that and why there's no other way to do it and that they need to comply.
Definitely. Fred, how about yourself?
Well, I haven't been counseled myself, but I'm sitting here thinking about how much I learned as soon as I had a family member who was in a wheelchair. I mean, I had so many really stupid attitudes that I had to unlearn. And so I really appreciate what you said, Jason, about, trying to respectfully and quietly, educate people around you because they need it. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to intent too. I mean, is it a matter of just not knowing, or is it a matter of being malicious or being intentionally demeaning to somebody? I think more often than not, it's not that way.
Yeah, yeah.
But there is one subject about cancel culture that I did want to mention in this.
Sure.
Is how people, it happens more on the left. The concept of wokeness. I don't know.
Yeah.
Heard about this?
Of course.
Now, there are a lot of very positive things that go along with that, right? To respect everybody for all of our differences and recognize that diversity is our strength. But at the same time, this is where this cancel culture comes in a lot, is you get people, and especially young people, who don't know any different, and they're judging you by today's standards. And 10 years ago, where somebody's other standards might live because they haven't experienced those other things,
right?
They misspeak and then they get attacked or canceled because of certain language they use or certain attitudes that they hold that somehow somebody finds offensive somewhere down the line and immediately, without explanation, gets disregarded. So I just wanted to get that little piece in there about how that's the other side, right?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And that's definitely something, I wish we had more time to talk about. But yeah, the idea of wokeness, like, wow, all of a sudden you're very enlightened about all of this stuff that you didn't necessarily live through or experience, like at one point in time, the term, retarded was used, right? And eventually it got into the kind of like the social, our social construct of language as being demeaning, right? And then as it's become more popular to look at that term and say that's offensive, now we are like, if a person uses it and they have a large platform who lived in a time period where the language was okay to use that and you didn't necessarily mean harm with it, now those who may be disabled or an advocate for disability and they're like, young, didn't experience that, right? It doesn't mean that using the term is okay, but sometimes like words get put into the social lexicon and then we forget that that was an acceptable thing. Like, you can say fire retarded, but you put the word fire before it and you're like, oh, it means to repel. And now all of a sudden that's quite fine to say, right? So it's a lot of colloquialism, idioms that just, eventually there's going to be some term in 2023 that 40 years from now is going to be offensive. And for those who are young enough to live 40 years from now, they're going to hear it and go, man, I remember when everybody was saying that. And nobody was being canceled over it. But now it's an offensive thing because, as we talked about earlier, language changes, life is progressive. Things are not what they were in the 1940s than when they were in the 50s, 60s, and so forth. But guys, thank you so much. This has been an excellent discussion. I'm so happy that everybody had the opportunity to join in. If anybody has anything else to add, please do so just real briefly. Other than that, I'm just going to close and, you guys enjoy your night. Anybody?
And so, Fred, are you going to start showing up at the meetings from now on then?
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Well, this has been fun. The problem is Jonathan going to be embarrassed if his old dad shows up?
Oh, no. No. No, we welcome you guys anytime.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you. This has been really good. Corey, you do a great job.
Yeah, thanks, you guys.
Yes,
No
thank you.
problem.
And good questions, Corey, as usual. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you for that.
Thank you. No problem. Listen, thank you guys for participating in our More Than Walking video podcast discussion. Stay tuned and join us next month and sign up for the More Than Walking newsletter at morethanwalking.com to learn about the topic we will be covering next. Until next time, remain encouraged, stay hopeful, and above all else, be aware. And
Everybody
have a great night, everyone.
Stay woke, everybody.
Yeah.
Stay woke and stay healthy.
That's right. Stay healthy. That's right.